So thank you very much everyone for joining our webinar this morning. We are really delighted to be joined by a really expert panel of speakers this morning, and we're going to be talking about the very hot topic on people's lips at the moment, which is returning to the workplace and adjusting to the new normal. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. There is a chat function, as some of you have already seen. So if you want to put anything in the chat box throughout, please feel free. But we've also got a Q&A function as well. So if you'd like to submit questions throughout, we have got a few questions that we're going to be starting with and some key topics that we're going to talk through. But myself and Johanna will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A function throughout, so that if any come up, we will try and get to as many as we can. So really delighted to have our two expert speakers this morning. I'm not going to talk too much anymore. I'm going to let Eugene and Beth introduce themselves. So Eugene, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. Hi Emily. Hi Beth, good morning. Oh, and Johanna. I just realised I might even have the same shirt as my picture. That's a faux pas, isn't it? So I'm Eugene Farrell. I'm mental health lead at AXA PPP Healthcare, which means I get involved in all sort of aspects of mental health policy development, services, consultancy work, all of those kind of things. I'm also the chair of the UK Employee Assistance Professionals Association, and I've been working in mental health for years and years and years, actually, and I'm really pleased to be here today.
Thanks, Huge. Beth, hi.
Yeah, hi everyone, good morning. So I'm Beth Sampson. I'm the HR OD People Advisor at Investors in People. I have a real passion for mental health and wellbeing at work. And if I have to kind of sum up what I do in a nutshell, it's basically making the Investors in People purpose, make work better, happen internally for our people. So I'm very excited to be here today, sharing my thoughts.
Thank you. And then myself, Emily Cook, and Johanna Shoitsu are going to be hosting this session and putting all your questions to our panelists. Hi, Johanna.
Hi, thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah, I'm really excited for this session, and I hope we answer as many questions as possible during this hour. Thank you.
So the key topics we're going to talk about today are, we're going to start by looking at what some of the key challenges might be for returning to the workplace. And we're going to look at this from a perspective of both individuals, what individuals might be faced with, as well as employers. And then we're going to look at what can employers and managers do to support the return to work, either from furlough or whether it's adjusting to a new way of virtual working, for example. And then how can individuals prepare for the return to work? And we're also going to try and answer any other questions that pop up throughout. So please feel free to jump in as we go. So let's kick off then. What do you think some of the key challenges will be for people returning to the workplace? And I'll go to you first, Eugene.
Okay, thanks. That's a good place to start. You know, it's going to be a bit daunting, I think, for people. So I'm thinking about the psychological safety aspect. So we're leaving the sanctuary of our psychological safety of being at home. And, you know, for many, many weeks, we've been told, stay at home, you know, don't mix with people, don't do anything. There's something really dangerous out there. And now, you know, we've been getting on with work while we've been doing that. But, you know, apart from going out to do a bit of shopping or going to the park, we've been at home. So now we're being asked to not stay at home and return to the workplace for many people and leave that sanctuary, that protection. And I think for lots of people, that's going to be an anxiety-provoking experience in that you don't know what the workplace is going to look like. You don't know how it's going to work. You don't know about your travel arrangements. You don't know what you're going to do with meeting people. So I think there's going to be an understandable anxiety around all of that. And if you're already anxious, as indeed many people are, then that's going to be increasing that anxiety. So I think that's a start place for me, is we're leaving almost a safety and going out into what we've been told is a dangerous world. And that's maybe not as easy as it might think. You might think it's going to be for some people. And so we shouldn't underestimate what that might feel like. So that's my first start.
I completely agree with you. I mean, that's something that I feel as well. And we perceive uncertainty as a risk generally. We don't deal well with not knowing what's going to happen and being kind of out of control. So absolutely, I agree. I think that's a really, really important point. What about you, Beth?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, you know, there's so many challenges and they are very individual. They differ person to person. So I know some people are raring to go to get back into the office, and for other people it's almost unthinkable at this stage. And I think you're right, the bubble of what feels safe and what feels certain and what feels under control has got quite small during this time. The thought of kind of making that bigger again is quite daunting. And there's also a lot of sort of practical challenges to work through. You know, how do you actually get to work if you usually use public transport? You know, what happens with all the kind of caring responsibilities that you might have had while you've been at home. I think I saw a stat saying that some amazing number of people have recently got puppies. What happens to the puppy if you go back to work, for example? So there's just a huge amount to think about, I think, and that's daunting when, you know, it's coming off the back of a few months that have been, for lots of people, very exhausting and very stressful already. Our reserves are running quite low, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Johanna, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think, yeah, really intense feelings some of us might experience are really like the anger maybe and the frustration, like because maybe some of us are still shielding or have a child at home and they feel the pressure that they have to come back to work because the company encourages them to, but they still have this child at home or like have got kind of to the routine or feel like this is not safe for them to come back, but still the company forces them maybe to come back. So all those different feelings which make us maybe insecure, angry, or feeling powerless maybe as well, because yeah, we just don't have to say anything what's happening right now and what are the next steps to go for. And yeah, I think there are just so many intense feelings we experience right now connected to this feeling of change again, which you touched on, is like, so yeah, we're not really made, or like we are made for change, but we struggle sometimes with change, and it can be this uncertainty or it can cause stress in ourselves. So I think there's so many experiences we have to go through, and some people might even have like a bereavement. So like some of us maybe lost someone through the last months or weeks through the coronavirus. So I think especially them maybe struggle with a lot of sadness or like stress. So just so many feelings we have to consider and are involved in those challenges right now.
Yeah, you make a really
I like that concept about abandoning. I think that's a really important one. You know, if you've been the protector of the home, or seen yourself in that role, that you're suddenly abandoning everybody, and you know, you're leaving your kids at home, you're leaving your puppy at home, and potentially you're bringing back something dangerous because now you're out in the world. So that abandonment is a really interesting aspect as well.
Yeah, we talked about that the other day actually, about that kind of cognitive conflict of, you know, you want to get back out there, you want to get to the workplace, and depending on what you do, you might feel like you're, especially for example healthcare workers or people on the front line, they've got a really key job to do, but then there's that grappling of maybe dealing with guilt about potentially putting their families at risk or themselves at risk. And I think that's a really, really important point to be aware of. Do you think that, I wanted to talk about people on furlough, because obviously that's been quite a new thing for people. And you know, we know that a lot of people will probably have maybe enjoyed having a slower pace of life, but we know that work provides that key sense of purpose, that structure, that routine. And so perhaps I think people who've been on furlough might have struggled with adjusting to that kind of not really having that purpose or routine anymore. Do you think that they're going to be at higher risk of sort of struggling to adjust maybe with returning to the workplace, or do you think that population will be any different? I'll go to you first, Beth.
Yeah, I think there are definitely unique challenges around people returning from furlough, and I think it will probably require a fair bit of work sort of from the employer to smooth that return, and I think to really take a human approach as well, because everyone's situation will be different. And I think it's great that the government has meant furlough can basically be flexed, so people can return perhaps on part-time hours to get back into it. But I guess it kind of exacerbates all the other problems of returning to work, you know, around communication, connection, sort of rediscovering what you actually do at work. I mean, for some people, it could have been months since they logged into their computer. You know, perhaps the projects that were high priority a couple of months ago, the landscape's completely changed. So,
yeah,
some unique challenges, I think.
Yeah. What about you, Huge?
Well, I think, you know, those people who've been off work for a while and experienced that in the past will know what this feels like, you know. So if you've been on mat leave, or if you've been on long-term sick leave, or you've just taken a sabbatical, sometimes it happens when you've been on holidays, but, you know, you probably have to have a longer holiday to experience it quite so much. That feeling of getting back when everything's different and new, and as Beth says, you know, I don't know how to log in. I've forgotten what my passwords are. What's changed? What isn't there? It's quite a daunting thing. So we have to think about how we get people back, and you know, maybe the way is to kind of ease your way back in rather than jump straight back in onto everything all in one day and be expected to just do everything perfectly straight away. So you know, I think employers have got some experience of bringing people back to work, and you could usefully use that in this circumstance. But you know, if people have felt threatened though, being furloughed, and they weren't sure whether they were ever coming back, you know, I think that's a very different feeling, and so that may have changed their mindset towards their employer and work as well. So, you know, there's that trust and, you know, engagement to be built back up as well.
Yeah, and that's a really key point you make as well. And I think that's something that is probably another challenge that employers and managers are going to have on their hands, is how you re-engage those people that have been unfortunately on furlough. And it's been a great scheme, but obviously there are challenges with that. And I think some people will lack that confidence as well. Like you were saying, they might have forgotten their passwords or not feel in the loop anymore. So coming back, they may feel like they're not good enough to do the job, or they lack some skills, or that they're behind. And so there's a lot that employers and managers are going to have to do to really help reintegrate furloughed people back into the workforce, as well as the general workforce as well.
And we know also, don't we, that people can be their biggest own critic. And
yeah.
So, you know, when you're not confident, and there's that real danger that you really over criticize yourself. So, you know, from an individual perspective, it's about being kind to yourself and not over criticizing. And also, you know, from employers' perspective, it's about encouraging and making sure that people do feel wanted and belonging, and those little niggles that you have to get over, you can get over really easily. Like, you know, I forget my password when I go away for a weekend sometimes, but, you know, if you've been off since February or March, then everything is different.
Absolutely.
That's such a good point as well. I think, you know, whether you've been furloughed or you've been working from home, or whatever your situation is, change throws up those feelings of sometimes of insecurity, you know, things like imposter syndrome. All that uncertainty builds, you know, your confidence can be impacted. So there's a lot that managers and employers can do to support, keep giving positive feedback, and to just really care for their people, I guess.
Yeah. We've had a couple of questions. We had one person say in the chat that there's also that feeling of being disposable, which I think that's a really key point. We've had a couple of questions. I'd be interested to know the panelists' thoughts on employees with pre-existing conditions, such as agoraphobia, having adjusted quite well to working from home or furlough, and now having to return to the workplace. Yuj, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a really, really valid point. And I think we heard, you know, from from clinicians, people with things, anxiety, etc., were feeling better actually through being all at home, and that actually the world around them was often more dangerous. So, in some ways, some people felt better for being at home. But yeah, now we're going from not the kind of daily dose of exposure to the outside world to a sudden shift from protection, and as I said, leaving that sanctuary of your own home. That psychological sanctuary, that can be incredibly anxiety provoking, and it's one to take great caution with, I think, and to do it carefully and slowly, and not expect that it's going to be absolutely perfect. So it's definitely a situation to take slowly, that one, I think.
Johanna she's one of our coaches that runs our in-app chat function as a psychologist. Johanna, have you noticed anything, or through any of the conversations you've been having with people, about how they're feeling if they've had a pre-existing condition, for example?
Yeah, I think like what I realized, for example, there are many challenges, right? So that people being socially isolated and feeling lonely, that they kind of lose their self-confidence and self-esteem, and even a kind of feeling of self-worth sometimes as well. So they really struggle with, like, they're getting in this vicious cycle, right? Not having the contact of people. Maybe some of them might be really isolating themselves, so maybe not having a family around them, and then getting in the cycle like that they're afraid of meeting people again, or that they're scared of like how it will be in the office again, if there might be like some stigma around as well. So maybe people fear that they kind of not in the team anymore. So all those like uncertainties, and those like the cycle, which makes them even more worried and stuck in the negative thoughts about like all those concern and worries. I think I experienced that as a really big topic right now. And there are obviously also concerns about like financial issues. So some people, especially like where the industry forced them to completely shut down for the moment, because they're, for example, doing like some public events or like music or something like that. So they're really scared of like how the future looks like with the financial support, or like if they have any support at all. So there's so many concerns right now, and some of them might even feel that they lose their job forever. And I think those are like really big concerns for people right now, and can affect them very much. And like this feeling of isolation and loneliness kind of also enforces you to think more and more over that. So I think it can even like increase or trigger some mental health issues, which have been either there for a lower level, or like have been there or have not been there at all. But we are social creatures, right? So we need the social network and the social contact to build our resilience. So this is missing and so important, actually. And this is why I guess some people really struggle at home right now.
Yeah, very good point. Beth, what about you? Have you seen any, or have you had any conversations about sort of maybe supporting people with those kind of pre-existing conditions returning to the workplace, or has this come up for you?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we've kind of been thinking through, because we've only had sort of one person return physically to the workplace. We're very much making it an option if people need it, but the majority of people are happy to keep working from home, and that's the safest option. I think there's an opportunity with the return, because the entry into lockdown was very sudden, and it was very fast, and it was a shock. But I feel like with this, we have an opportunity to plan, to take it slower, and to really kind of think it through and come up with something tailored to individuals. So I guess it's just around kind of talking to that person, finding out like what would feel safe for them. Is it doing 1 day a week at first? And actually, this is an opportunity also to put changes in place for the future too. If we prove that we can work from home, and that suits that person, and it helps them feel well and happy, if we can accommodate that at work, then why wouldn't we? As long as they're still able to do their job and feel part of the kind of working community, perhaps that's something that could be considered. So trying to take a kind of, a positive view of the return as well. I think there are opportunities as well as challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I think those are really good points. So what, if we now talk about kind of what tips we can give people, how we can help people return to work, and I wanted to start with sort of maybe individuals. What tips would you give individuals, I suppose, to help them to prepare with that return and that transition? I'll go with you first, Beth.
Yeah, so I think I can speak personally. This has been an interesting time because I think you're confronted with yourself in a way that you're not in normal life. Usually it's easy to be busy and distracted, but in this lockdown, you kind of have to face up to who you are. So I think there's an opportunity to kind of like reflect and recognize, where you find your sources of support, what your kind of drivers are, what you get from work, and to really kind of think that stuff through as part of your thinking about returning to work too. Maybe write a list of things that you'd like to kind of start, stop, continue. I know we've all picked up new habits because of the change, and even what you want to kind of reinstate as well. I mean, there's things that I've definitely missed about being in a physical workplace that I can't wait to get back to. I can't wait to be in a room with post-it notes and colleagues and a whiteboard. So yeah, just kind of really thinking it through in a structured way.
Yeah, that's really good. What about you, Huge?
Well, I think there's several things. My first thing would be to say, as Beth said, actually, is don't underestimate the amount of people that are actually glad to get back. So they might be fed up at home, want to get away from the kids. They don't want. They've had enough of home office. WFH, working from home, isn't it? Or actually, they're just really keen to get back. So we've got to remember the positive side as well, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But I think my start point for people in terms of tips would be, acceptance is the big thing. Accept what you can't change and let go. It's very easy to kind of grab hold and hold on to the kind of negatives and things that we're all really concerned about, and they can become very consuming to us and occupy all of our cognitive space. So if we can accept and let go of things, then I think we can make that transition a little bit easier. And also stop and breathe. I'm always a big believer in that. Just make a stop, take a breath, in slowly, out. You don't have to do any fancy mindfulness, but if you're getting a bit overwhelmed, just take a stop, take a breath, and then think again, and then move on.
Yeah.
And don't make any decisions based on emotion or when you're angry or upset about something. So step back before you accept something or decline something or whatever, and think it through. So those are a couple of things.
Yeah, I think they're really important. I mean, we were talking about sort of sometimes people might be feeling a bit guilty about the situation, about, like you said earlier, about leaving maybe their home setup, and if they've got kids at home, they might feel guilty about leaving them and going back to the workplace, but they might want to go back to the workplace. So again, there's that kind of conflict there. And I think it's really important what you were saying about acceptance and really accepting limitations, because one of the themes that we've seen over the past few months is people putting this insane amount of pressure on themselves to be able to do 100% at their job and 100% at home, and it's just not working. So they're feeling guilty, they're feeling not good enough, they're looking at what other people are doing and thinking they're doing so much better than I am, and it's really impacting people's self-esteem. So it's just about accepting your limitations and accepting the things that you can control and the things that you can't. And I like what you said earlier as well, Yuj, about making decisions based on thought and not emotion. So sometimes it can help to really plan and prepare and maybe write down some things that you're feeling quite worried about. And rather than allowing yourself to get worried about them, and we go into this spiral of thinking, what if, and we think of all the worst case scenarios, actually think about how you would deal with that situation and maybe make a plan about it, whether it's how you're going to get to work on the first day, how you want to reintegrate into the workplace. Having that kind of plan can really help you to increase your feelings of control and confidence, can't they?
Yeah, no, another thing which I thought is really important here, that we stay connected, so that we either reach out to our colleagues or to our managers or just friends and family. So really having this support network and the people and sharing our experienced feelings about lockdown, about like feeling isolated. So it can help sometimes to just share how we feel about this whole situation. So I think I would really try to reach out to people and share whatever you're feeling and talking about what you're feeling. And you can also express your feelings more creatively. So if you feel like it helps you to write it down, or you like to draw something about it, like how you're feeling, just, yeah, if you feel, just be creative, but share your feelings, and this can help us to, yeah, just connect to other people, have this common ground in like shared experiences, which is so so helpful for our resilience. And you can also like think about things you're grateful for. So things about like being grateful during the lockdown, like have you tried something new, have you tried a new hobby, have you tried, so, or like, have you learned a new language? So, or did you try meditation? So there, I think we all kind of restructured our day a bit. And for example, me, I started being physically active, like going for a walk or for a run every day, and it helped me so much during the lockdown, and I definitely want to keep it up. So being grateful for the things we could do during lockdown, and which we may want to continue after the lockdown as well. And I think it can be really helpful to write those things sometimes down as well. So every evening or every morning, thinking about something you're grateful in the moment, or on the like on the specific day maybe. So it can be a tiny thing, like just, yeah, today the sun was shining, or like I had a really nice meal. So appreciating those small things every day can help us to increase our mood and our feeling of positive feelings. And I think the great techniques you can also do, for example, like just being active can help, and continuing that after lockdown, or just practicing some mindfulness in general. So practicing and helping yourself to be more in the present moment and appreciating the things. So coming back to the acceptance thing, I think is really helpful here.
There's lots of tips that we can go through, isn't there? I think we've got quite a few questions which I'm keen to get to. So what about the expectation that if you don't have children, you're expected to go back into the workplace, whilst those with children continue to work from home? There's sympathy for this, but should I feel discriminated against? Beth, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And it's something that's definitely occurred to us, is the kind of the feelings and perceptions of what's fair and unfair are definitely heightened at the moment. And I think that's a direct result of everything being up in the air. You know, things like status at work are up in the air. I guess the way that I would probably recommend approaching it, this is what I always recommend with situations like that, is to talk first, talk to your manager, express how you're feeling, kind of work through the options. But if it is the case that you feel like, you know, particular parts of the workforce are being treated differently, and there aren't sort of fair or reasonable, you know, justification for that, then it's definitely something to talk about and to discuss. And kind of putting my HR hat on from the other side, I think there's a lot that employers can do to support people, so that those feelings of perhaps unfairness or discrimination either don't arise or are nipped in the bud. And that can be forming, you know, focus groups, employee voice groups, doing surveys, so that you're hearing these things at an early stage, and you can put in place sort of initiatives and adjust processes so that they are fair, so that people do feel listened to, so that they don't feel discriminated against, and like everyone's needs are being addressed as you go into the process of returning.
Yeah. I think there's sometimes a bit of a fear about finding these things out, isn't there? It's almost like we don't want to ask because we don't want to know. We've got our plan, let's just do it. But this is where you start getting these things crop up. So yeah, I think you're nail on the head there with really asking your employees what's important. Yude, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's a time for openness and transparency, and you know, that's got to be a difficult subject, that one, and you've got to get it out there. You've got to talk it out, and you know, from an individual's perspective, you want an employer who's going to listen, and you know, for that individual, if you're feeling whatever you're feeling around that, whether you're feeling it's unfair or whatever, talk about both the decision, but also, and I recommend this throughout the whole of the return to work, is talking about how it's affecting you. So, and it does this to me, or it makes me feel this. So you can talk that out and what the emotion is, and rather than I'm just upset about the decision, but you know, the consequence of that and why it makes you feel that. Then you can talk and maybe some of that through. But yeah, deal with it early. And I think employers have, you know, get information out really early. So explain the decision. And I think that's a good rule for this whole return to work, is information is key for people, isn't it, at the moment? We're all struggling for good and bad information, and we've got the daily briefing that we all sit through, see who's going to come through the door and come to the lectern. You know, we're kind of, we need information to understand what's going to happen, to try and make sense of where things are. And so employers have got a real need to explain all of these things and explain the, you know, the workplace and the return to work. And maybe we'll come back to talking about the kind of rules of returning to work and explaining that. But information is really important, and talking it out is really important.
Yeah. I think relying on your social support as well, and not feeling, because I think it can be really easy when you feel like maybe you're the only one worried, because for example, if other people in your team are talking about returning to work, they might not be fully sharing whether they're anxious about it or nervous about it. So it can sometimes make you feel maybe a bit isolated, or that you're the only one who might be nervous about it. But I think encouraging talking amongst your colleagues or your family members or friends, because you'll probably find that there are other people who share your reservations and your anxieties, and it can really help to have a space where you talk about some of the emotional or social challenges that you're facing, because it can help you to troubleshoot them. It can help you to sort of alleviate some of those anxiety-inducing thoughts that we often ruminate on rather than sharing them. We've got a couple.
I was also thinking about, you know, what if there's a scenario that, say, you know, your best friend at work, your best buddy, the one that you always talk to, that all, you know, you help each other out, you know, that they're in that situation, not coming back in the same way because of kids. But you don't want to lose that friendship, do you? You've got to talk that out, and you know, that's your support at work and away from work sometimes. And it would be a shame to not address it and not to kind of sort that out, and how you're feeling about it. So don't let it sit there, I guess. Don't let it fester, and make sure it doesn't get in the way of real and genuine friendships. So, you know, for me, I'd always say, look back into yourself. Why is it I'm feeling like that? And examine that for a bit.
We've got one from someone that says, what suggestions would the panel have for anyone wanting to seek mental health support for either conditions or symptoms that have either newly presented themselves or worsened after lying dormant in lockdown? Most GPs and charities are understandably operating with a limited capacity. What do you think? I'll start with you, because I think you'll have quite a...
Well, I'd always start with whether you've got an EAP. That's a really important thing. So, you know, if you've got access to an EAP, that's going to be absolutely a key place to go. But yeah, persevere with it, I think, is important. If you can't get any help, if you don't have any help available and you can't get any immediately, you really need to persevere with that, because it could be exacerbated or made worse. So just leaving it and ignoring it is not a good place to be. So look to your employer. Maybe occupational health can help you with it. Maybe maybe you could go privately and look at some counselling or some support. And there are lots of people out there who are doing virtual and remote support now as well. So there are a number of different options, but I wouldn't leave it, is my advice. I think, we'd always say deal with things rather than leave them. And it will just come back later, or it'll just continually sit there, and that's not a place to be.
Yeah, and just for, we had one question asking what's an EAP. So it's an employee assistance program. And a lot of workplaces have them, and this is the challenge, that people don't know they exist. But they are, generally speaking, they are a phone line that you can use for free, that are fairly good, confidential and anonymous, aren't they, Eugene, from your workplace?
Yeah. Employer paid counselling at work program for employees to use confidentially. You could always use an app if you've got a useful one to do some cognitive work. That's maybe a good thing.
We might have one. I don't know. We can talk about that later. How do we manage
on that as well? It's the case that an EAP will support not just the person at work, but also their family. So it's always worth, talking to the people in your household, because you may be able to access support through an EAP through their employer, not necessarily your own. And there's also a website called Hub of Hope, which lists all the resources which are local to you. And obviously it may not be the case that you can go there physically at the moment, but it can be a good place to start in reaching out for support.
That's a really, really good point. I'm going to type that in the chat function for everyone if you want to visit that. So we've got one which I think we've sort of answered, but I wanted to bring it up again because I think this, Beth, I want you to address this one. How do we manage an employee if they live with someone who is very vulnerable and they don't want to return to the workplace? I think you made a really good point earlier about adjusting potentially and being mindful if they have been able to work from home. So I was keen to go to you for that one.
Yeah, definitely. So I would stand by that, being as flexible as you can in response to people's personal circumstances. I think now more than ever is the time to treat people as people, not just resources. And it may also be a really good use of time to support managers too, because they're likely to be the ones having those conversations kind of on the ground, one-to-one. I can take this opportunity to say, as an HR person, I think HR people are doing fantastic work, and I've seen amazing things out in our community, for example, but it is often managers that tackle these things sort of first on. So if you are an HR person in your organisation, invest the time in putting training in place for your managers about how they can have supportive, empathetic, difficult conversations, and provide them with the kind of structure so they can be flexible within that. And if that means offering people the chance to work from home indefinitely while this situation is unfolding, that might be something that is useful to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. We were chatting before we kicked off about some of the changes to people's workplace that we might not be thinking about. So a lot of the conversation at the moment is about getting people back into the workplace and how they're going to adjust with that change from being at home back into work. But one of the things that we talked about was the change to the actual working environment, which I thought was really important. And some people might be a bit nervous about not knowing what their office is going to look like, what kind of guidelines are going to be in place. They might be worried about how their employer is going to be making sure their safety is a priority. And I think that's a really important topic to talk about. Huge, did you want to start? I don't know whether you have anything to kind of say on this. You
yes.
This. You have the podium.
And there's another piece I want to get onto as part of this. Okay, yeah, absolutely right. New rules, that's the thing. So it's a time for explaining. As I said before, employers need to explain. It's supporting what Beth said earlier. This is a time for personal, not generic. So getting to know your people, and the plan needs to be around individuals. But we need to explain the rules. What are the rules? Where can you go? What's the one-way system look like? You know, what can you sit at? What can you touch? What can you not touch? That's, none of us know, unless there's been a huge document already prepared. But every workplace is going to be different. So employers can't expect people to just show up day one and know what all the rules are. And some of the rules haven't been thought about yet. So you've got to listen to people as you work your way through this as well. So it's a time for listening, as well as telling, as well as discussing, and all of those are really, really important. So explain the rules. But they also, the one thing that I did want to get onto, and I am a bit manic about this one myself, is what do you do about the rule breakers? Because that, you know, we've seen this huge outrage, you know, in the country about rule breakers. But what do you do genuinely in the workplace with either people who inadvertently break rules? And I don't think many employers have thought about this yet, or just don't, you know, they're not bothered about the rules. They don't really care. But other people are seeing the rule breaking, and they're worried also. If you're, you know, if you're worried about your health, not only just the breaking the rules, because that can be bad enough, but, you know, the effects upon that. So, you know, you're not hygiene enough, you're not washing your hands enough, you're touching all sorts of things, you're sitting in the places you shouldn't be. How are employers going to manage the rule breakers? Is it, you know, is it going to be a disciplinary thing? Is it going to be a sit-down thing? Is it going to be a, well, we'll see how it goes? You really need to think about, both line managers and HR, about rule breakers and what we do, because what we don't want is, you know, everybody in the workplace being seething about somebody who actually doesn't really understand part of the rules, or didn't get it, or actually they don't want to get it. So there's my big thing.
They're really good points. Really, really good points. What have you got anything on that, Beth? I guess you've probably thought about this quite a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And actually, you're completely right. I always think about people doing the best of things. I don't often let my mind drift to rule breakers. I guess I would hope that with enough kind of involvement in the workplace design and safety initiatives, that you could iron out some of that early on. Because if people don't want to follow a rule, I would hope that they would tell me why, and then we could address that as part of our planning. I guess another thing to consider, you know, if we are changing the physical workplace so it's safer, there's no reason why that has to be unpleasant. I was talking to my mum yesterday. She's a primary school teacher, and she said the big kind of overarching purpose when they went back to school was to make it feel safe and fun. But they had, you know, corridors marked off with police tape and all sorts that made it actually seem quite daunting, quite scary. So perhaps it's about, like you say, listening, consulting. Is there a reason why people won't walk one way down a corridor? Is there something that you can do about that? But if it carries on, then it's a difficult conversation, isn't it? You know, you're a rule breaker, you're making other people feel uncomfortable and anxious. It's something that has to change.
Yeah.
And flexible too, isn't it? I think, Beth, the workplace has to listen and respond and flex, because you're probably not going to get it right straight off, are you? It's going to be, we'll work it out a little bit.
Yeah, everyone's exploring it in the same way as well, aren't they? We're all sort of feeling this out for the first time.
Yeah, well, we're all completely new to this situation, so again, it comes back to accepting the limitations and accepting, you know, we don't always have control over a situation. We've got some more questions coming in, so I'm keen to try and answer as many as possible. How can employees raise concerns about their health being at risk by returning to work? An example is a friend who works as a teacher in a primary school feels guilty for not wanting to return to work, as they want the best for their children, but they are high risk and don't see how they can assure they will not come into contact with anyone at work. I think this comes down to clear communication again, doesn't it?
Yep. Dialogue and listen, talk. And culture, you know, you want to make sure you actually have a workplace culture that's okay to say things like that. You know, I'm also thinking about, you know, in the workplace, you know, there's no shame or stigma to people, you know, raising things, or, you know, them themselves feeling weak, that, you know, everybody else is coping, but I'm not. They're probably not, actually. They're probably underneath that as anxious as you are. So, It's a cultural thing as well, isn't it? We have a way to talk to each other, and we can raise those important subjects. So it is important to have that dialogue always. And we keep saying that, don't we?
I completely agree with you with the like focusing on kind of like an inclusive and supportive culture. So really being aware of some employees who might need some adjustments or need, for example, starting with flexible hours because yes, they still have someone at home. So having this like communication and openness where people can address their needs for adjustments or like changes, or if they just feel more, if they have, for example, someone at risk at home, if they feel more comfortable starting work, continuing with working from home and maybe just continuously coming back to work. So having this conversation about like what are the needs, what maybe is there change to the role as well, because some people experience changes in role if they work from home and coming back to the office. So maybe going through together, like managers and employees together through the first day of work or through the task they're doing. So just communicating all those changes, which help everyone so much to kind of have a clearer vision of how work will look like when they come back. And it can help, for example, if we go through like mentally through the first day of work and think, what do I need? Is something unclear for me? So maybe address those unclarities with the manager, and managers the same, like being really clear about like any safety or risk assessments they have done in the organization. And I think it's a lot about like what we experience with the coaching as well, that people just don't know what managers or organizations have done for them, like how they're addressing those risk factors at work, and what are the steps they're doing, how do they guarantee for their safety. So I think just about this clarity and communication about all those things happening, and just not expecting everything to be perfect from the first minute as well. So accepting that we might struggle a bit like with changing again, not doing everything perfectly from the first day of work again, was the same like when we shifted to remote working, right? So just taking one step after the other and communicating those things, I think can really help people to feel more safe returning back to work.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple more questions. So there's one from an individual which I really wanted to address, because I think this is going to be something that maybe a few people have felt as well. So this individual suffers from depression and anxiety and has found the time very difficult. I find myself now getting anxious when working at home, as I'm alone all day, and then getting anxious of the changes that might have occurred since I last went into the office. My desk is my sanctuary, and so I'm concerned it will become quarantined. So yeah, I wanted to talk about this because I think it's really, we were talking earlier about how when you kind of get into this space of you've built this kind of safety net, I suppose, about being at home, but then you've also got challenges of maybe feeling isolated away from your team. I don't know what your personal situation is, whether you're on furlough or for so on. But it can be really easy to get into sort of a mindset of really starting to ruminate on some of these things that might make you feel worried or anxious, or challenge your self-esteem and your confidence. And sometimes that is a big blockade for actually talking about it. And once you do start talking about it, or even if you write these things down that are worrying you or making you feel like this, and then start to work through them in a bit more of a kind of problem solving type mindset, it can really help to sort of alleviate some of those feelings of almost hopelessness, or things not getting better, or that uncertainty. So I'm a big advocate of either, if you don't feel comfortable necessarily talking about it, and I definitely think that, you know, talking to your manager about this is going to be really important, but actually just almost talking to yourself and writing these things down, and almost questioning why you feel this way, and what's the evidence to say that things are going to be really hard if I go back to the office. And often you find that when you work things through in that way, you start to realize actually they might not be so bad, and you might be able to deal with them, or you're not alone. So that's what I would say. I don't know whether any of our panelists can add to that.
I would totally echo that. I tell myself at least once a day that my thoughts aren't facts. just because I think it's not necessarily true, especially when it comes to sort of anxious thoughts. But one thing that I've seen work really well that's very practical is using a wellness action plan. Mind have them, you can download them for free. They've actually got one tailored to working from home at the moment. And the reason why I find that useful is because it's very structured, and you can work through it as an individual, and it kind of leads you through what you find helps and what you find are triggers. So you kind of go through that yourself, and then if you feel comfortable, you can share that with your manager or even with colleagues in your team, so that they know, you know, how you're feeling, what sort of things help or don't help, and also what they can do to support if you do start getting into that kind of cycle of thoughts, so you start feeling unwell. So that's one that I always advocate to people as a good place to start.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that one. There's really good cognitive resources as well for that kind of thoughts and feelings and evidence, and that you can look up on the internet. There's loads of them, so you can go through that process. But I was just thinking also, you know, there's a place for looking for the positives, isn't there? So Johanna talked about gratitude, but there's also a place for, let's look for the positives in a situation, because there's often, you know, a hidden positive or two in there, hidden behind the kind of gremlins and negativity that are trying to obscure the view. So if we can get onto a bit of that as well, that can be helpful.
Yeah,
like from a growth perspective as well, right? So this like concept of anti-fragility, so that we kind of grow from, for example, challenges or failures, so that they maybe even help us to grow even bigger, so that we learn from them, and maybe in the next challenge we feel more resilient and more prepared for something like that, or just general stress. So I think it can help to see it from a more like growth perspective, and seeing what we can take from that, what we can learn from that, and shifting therefore this like negative to more positive aspects of how we focus on challenges, for example.
yeah, that's really important.
Good one, yeah.
We did a webinar a couple of weeks ago, didn't we, Eugene, about harnessing the positives during this situation. I think it's so easy to focus on everything that's negative that's happening and all of the things that we're feeling worried about, but actually taking some time to think about what you feel grateful for, what you've enjoyed about this period, what are the positives in it, and it might just be a really small thing, can really help to just boost your kind of mood and give you something to carry through. How do panelists feel about COVID having challenged the unhelpful stereotype of presenteeism, and how this work can be furthered to support colleagues who need more flexible working patterns or to work from home to support their mental well-being? I mean, I think that this again comes down to open dialogue and communication. What do you guys think?
Yeah, well, we keep saying that. I think that's a central theme. You know, I mean, talking about growth and change, I guess this whole thing has given us all an opportunity to think about what we want in life and what we might want in the future and how we might want to work, and for employers to think about the future of work also. So there are possibilities and options to change perhaps the way we want to work, or change our work, or change the future. I think that's a fair thing to look at. It doesn't mean that we're trying to get back to the same thing that we had before. So it might be a good time to take stock and review things. And I think a good employer, if they're not already, should be sitting to look at, you know, what things could we do differently? Does everybody absolutely have to be in the workplace? And start talking that out with people in the work, you know, with their employees, about would flexibility or would changes to the way we work be a good thing for the future, and maybe thinking about those as we go forward. Once we get past this kind of the police tape and the one-way systems and all of that, there is an opportunity to change work.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm conscious of time now. I think this is definitely something we could continue talking about for a long time, and I'm sure there's going to be loads more questions. I suppose I just wanted to kind of wrap it up now, and maybe I'll come to each panelist and see if you've got anything else to add at the end. But the key for me personally throughout all of this discussion has really been about both individuals and employers and managers focusing on that open dialogue and communication. Because often what we can do is jump to conclusions and assume that we know what the outcome of the situation will be, and usually it's a negative one. So sometimes that can stop us from actually having a conversation and asking for support or giving our opinion. But in this situation, remember that we're all in this new environment that none of us have been in before, and it's perfectly normal to not know what you're going to do and how you're going to cope, and just have that open dialogue with your family, with your friends, with your employers, and your staff. So that for me is my sort of key takeaway from this. Have you got anything else you want to add?
My only take, I think my last piece to say, and it is remain optimistic. It may not be as bad as we might think, and that optimism creates a different kind of view to things. Keep an open mindset to changes and what your employer is trying to do, and be flexible. I think that's, if we can do all of those, that can help us navigate through it, because it's not going to be perfect from the minute one we arrive in the workplace.
Yeah, brilliant. And Beth, what about you?
Yeah, I completely agree with being optimistic. Look at the challenges, but also look at the opportunities. When everything's changing, are there things that you can do to make the future better? And also changes do sort of start with us as individuals. So when people ask me how I am, my reflex is to say completely fine. But actually, if I'm encouraging open, honest conversations, then I need to start by saying, actually, today I'm not great. I woke up and I'm feeling anxious. So there are also things that we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Johanna, finally, we'll come to you.
Yeah, no, I think you made some great comments, and for me it's again like all about the communication, right? So sharing feelings as well, so being open, as Beth said, about the feelings or the experiences we went through, and practicing gratitude as well. So not only having the negative perspective, but seeing some positive or great things which you experienced and you want to keep up in the future. Maybe write them down, be grateful about some tiny things every day, and see it as an opportunity to grow, right? So see the positive things and not only the negative things about it. And just connect with people and share your feelings in general.
Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. So we have a host of resources on our YouTube channel from previous webinars we've done, which can help address individuals if you're wanting to know about tips to actually manage your stress, your worry, your anxiety, and so on. That's another topic that we could talk about for ages. So I hope everyone's found this useful. We are going to be pulling together a bit of a return to work guide, which will cover all of the things that we've talked about today, and probably and include those helpful resources that Beth mentioned as well. So hope everyone's found it useful. We will send the recording of this session in the next day or so you'll all have a copy of it. And please enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. Thank you.